Here's some news on the Russia-Ukraine front. Putin offers truce if Ukraine exits Russian-claimed areas and drops NATO bid. Kiev rejects it. So this was printed on Friday. Russian President Vladimir Putin promised Friday to immediately order a ceasefire in Ukraine and start negotiations if Kiev began withdrawing troops from the 4 regions annexed by Moscow in 2022 and renounced plans to join NATO. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected what he called an ultimatum by Putin to surrender more territory. Putin's remarks came as Switzerland prepared to host scores of world leaders, but not from Moscow this weekend, to try and map out first steps toward peace in Ukraine. Let's go to a little bit of video of Putin's remarks.
These principles are quite straightforward. Ukraine must fully withdraw its troops from the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, from the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions. And let me emphasize that I'm talking about the entire territories of these regions within their administrative borders as they existed under Ukraine. As soon as Kyiv says that it's ready and starts the withdrawal of its troops, and once they say that they're no longer willing to join NATO, just the same moment, immediately, we will stop the fire and launch talks. We will do this immediately. Let me repeat this. At the same time, we guarantee that Ukraine will be able to withdraw its troops safely. These decisions on the withdrawal of troops and then non-aligned status and the dialogue with Russia, which will define Ukraine's future, we believe that these decisions must be taken by Kyiv independently, guided by the genuine interests, national interests of the Ukrainian people, without getting instructions from the West.
Okay, so back to the article. They also coincided with a meeting of leaders of the Group of 7 leading industrialized nations in Italy, and after the U.S. and Ukraine this week signed a 10-year security agreement that Russian officials, including Putin, denounced as null and void. Putin blasted the Switzerland conference as, quote, just another ploy to divert everyone's attention, reverse the cause and effect of the Ukrainian crisis, and set the discussion on the wrong track. His demands came in a speech at the Russian Foreign Ministry and was aimed at what he called a final resolution of the conflict rather than freezing it, and stressed the Kremlin is ready to start negotiations without delay. Broader demands for peace that Putin listed included Ukraine's recognition of Crimea as part of Russia, keeping the country's non-nuclear status, restricting its military force, and protecting the interests of the Russian-speaking population. All of these should be part of fundamental international agreements, and all Western sanctions against Russia should be lifted, Putin said. We're urging to turn this tragic page of history and to begin restoring step by step the unity between Russia and Ukraine and in Europe in general, he said. Putin's remarks, made to a group of somber foreign ministry officials and some senior lawmakers, represented a rare occasion in which he clearly laid out his conditions for ending the war in Ukraine, but it didn't include any new demands. That's important. Did not include any new demands. The Kremlin has also said before that Kyiv should recognize its territorial gains and drop its bid to join NATO. Zelensky in Italy for the G7 meeting said Putin's proposal was not new and was in the form of an ultimatum, comparing it to actions by Adolf Hitler in seizing territory that led to World War II. No, the whole point, the argument to take the deal.
It's exactly the same.
The argument to take the deal is that there's nothing new in it, because you basically lost the war. So
right.
The fact that there's nothing new in the demands, that's a big concession to you. That's a lot more than a lot of people thought you were going to get. That's an argument for taking it, not for pushing it away. The fact that there's nothing new in there, that's good for you. Unbelievable.
Well,
Putin,
also the regions that he is claiming are essentially Russian. This was another one of those just crazy redrawings of a map in a very complicated region where the boundaries between peoples are just not that clear after millennia of going back and forth and migrating and switching which empire runs this territory this decade and then another one runs it that decade. In the East, they are Russian speaking for the most part. So he also offered a referendum. He's not offering that now. He was earlier on. I mean, why not just do that? I thought we're supposed to be all about people's self-determination, right? So why don't you let those people self-determine?
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say that because I've mentioned this on the show a couple of times. I, for almost my entire life, until this war started, actually, thought myself to be half Maltese, 50% Maltese, because my mother is full Maltese. And then on my father's side, a quarter German and a quarter Russian. It wasn't until very recently that I
why
learned.
you're able to go out in the daylight.
Yeah, right, exactly. It wasn't until just recently that I learned I'm actually a quarter Ukrainian, not Russian, because actually my grandmother is from, I guess, that eastern region where we always called them Russian, but apparently, according to
on
these
your
boundaries,
father's side?
Yeah, they are Ukrainian.
So they were Ukrainian Jews.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you're still an Ashkenazi Jew.
Oh, well, yeah, no, that part. Yeah, no, that I knew. But I didn't know that I was a quarter Ukrainian. I thought I was a quarter Russian. And I was thrilled to learn I was a quarter Ukrainian because it gives me a lot of license to speak this way about this issue. So that really worked out very well for me.
You hear that, everybody? Don't reveal the plans when Keaton's around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What Putin demands is to give them a part of our territories, those occupied and not occupied, talking about several regions of our country. He said, Ukraine's foreign ministry called Putin's plan manipulative, absurd, and designed to mislead the international community, undermine diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving a just peace, and split the unity of the world majority around the goals and principles of the UN Charter. Besides seeking to join NATO, Ukraine wants Russian forces out of its territory, including the Crimean Peninsula that was illegally annexed in 2014, the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, and that Russia be held accountable for war crimes and for Moscow to pay reparations to Kiev. So obviously, all of those are non-starters. Obviously, those are not going to happen. If you wanted those to happen, you'd have had to have won the war, which you didn't. Zelensky advisor Mikhailo Podolyak said on social media there was nothing new from Putin and that the Russian leader voiced only the standard aggressor set, which has been heard many times already. There is no novelty in this, no real peace proposals, and no desire to end the war. But there is a desire not to pay for this war and to continue it in new formats. It's all a complete sham, Podolyak wrote on X. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says NATO headquarters in Brussels, NATO headquarters in Brussels, that Putin has illegally occupied sovereign Ukrainian territory. He is not in any position to dictate to Ukraine what they must do to bring about a peace. So it looks like a peace deal was on the table and then taken off the table. And here, obviously, this published just today, this morning, 80 countries at Swiss conference agree Ukraine's territorial integrity must be basis of any peace. So this was the summit that the Russians were not invited to. They got a great engagement photographer to take the picture here on this.
Look at the happy couple.
This looks like, when you hire people, not a wedding, but, when you hire someone to sneakily take a picture of you, popping the question, they hide around there. That's the look they capture there.
Can't do that in Gaza.
No, you can't do that in fucking Gaza. Can't do that shit in fucking Gaza. Come to Israel if you want to propose to Volodymyr Zelensky. You got to come to fucking Tel Aviv. Yeah, you fuck. Yeah. So here's the peace summit.
You try using that fucking Russian motor oil for lubricant.
Yeah, right, exactly.
We got 80 kinds of lube just in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, exactly. 80 countries jointly called Sunday for the territorial integrity of Ukraine to be the basis for any peace agreement to end Russia's 2-year war, though some key developing nations at a Swiss conference did not join in. The joint communique capped a 2-day conference at the Bergenstock Resort in Switzerland, marked by the absence of Russia, which was not invited, but that many attendees hoped could join in on a roadmap to peace sometime in the future. So obviously, Putin's proposed peace deal was laid out at a strategic time because he knew that a couple days later they were going to come out and claim that the territorial demands of Ukraine had to be respected in order to secure any permanent peace deal here. About 100 delegations, mostly Western countries, but also some key developing nations, were on hand for the conference that was billed as a first step toward peace at a time when the warring countries are seemingly as far apart as ever. The event included presidents and prime ministers from France, Germany, Britain, Japan, Poland, Argentina, Ecuador, Kenya, and Somalia. The final document said that the UN Charter and respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty can and will serve as a basis for achieving a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. Voila Amherd, the Swiss president who hosted the event, told the final news conference the great majority of participants agreed to the final document, which shows what diplomacy can achieve. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky hailed the first steps toward peace at the meeting and said the joint communique remains open for accession by everyone who respects the UN Charter, testifying to both war fatigue and other preoccupations that have emerged in recent months. Only about half UN member countries took part. In March 22, condemnation of Russia's invasion led to passage of a non-binding resolution at the UN General Assembly by 141 countries calling for a halt to Moscow's use of force and pullout of Russian troops. Many countries wanted the involvement of representatives of the Russian Federation, Zelensky told a final news conference. At the same time, the majority of the countries do not want to shake hands with them, meaning Russian leaders, so there are various opinions in the world. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU's Executive Commission, said the conference was rightly entitled Path to Peace, because peace won't be achieved in a single step. Well, that's awfully reassuring. So there you have a proposal to end the war on the terms that could have avoided the war in the first place. You need to let those eastern territories go. We need recognition of the Crimea as ours. And you need to pledge neutrality. And the fact that they were offered essentially that same exact deal 29 months later, that was a pretty good deal. Just like it was a pretty good deal before this whole thing started. Now you're talking about 500,000 dead and injured, and you're still turning down a peace deal that you're pretty lucky to have been offered, considering that these are essentially the same terms that were laid out before the war started.
What's really terrifying about this is if you assume that Zelensky is not a complete moron, and I do, he's assuming that eventually he's going to be able to drag NATO into this war. Because what else could you be thinking? There's no way they can win it on their own. His gamble is that when all else fails, and it will, they're just going to run out of bodies to throw at the Russians, that the U.S. is going to send troops in, and NATO along with them, that we are going to fight World War III over Ukraine. He's assuming it. Otherwise, why wouldn't he take the peace deal? I mean, the only other explanation is they want to keep the, he's so evil that whatever money they're robbing from this aid, they want to keep that going as long as possible. It's one of the two. Or maybe some of both, really.
Probably some of both. I think the second is sort of an added perk of the first, because I think you're right. And this is what you said at the beginning of the war. You said this is an extremely dangerous situation because Ukraine's plan, to the extent that they have one, right? I mean, unless Zelensky was just a total dupe, which is possible, but as you say, not especially likely. Like, I don't think so. Yeah. I mean, that could be true, but I don't think so. I think more likely is that they figure we can extend this until this blows up into World War III, at which point we have a chance because now we have actual U.S. troops and U.S. weapons and EU troops and EU weapons on the grounds, right? That's a war that could theoretically be won. Even now, at this point, I would say good luck, right? But that is, at least you have a theoretical chance. Ukraine against Russia one-on-one, even with all this money we have poured in, you had no chance. There was never any chance to win. This was always just a horribly tragic misunderstanding of the situation at best. At worst, who knows what happens, behind closed doors at these conferences. We know Kamala Harris was in Germany urging them to join NATO. I mean, there are certain things we're just not privy to and will not be privy to for many years, if it ever comes out at all. But certainly, looking at it from the outside, it is psychotic and suicidal to continue this another day. Much less take another 60 billion in aid. There was a story broke the other day, another $50 billion loan they're talking about giving to Ukraine. Right. They just put another 1.5 out the door. It is just suicidal and insane.
Well, yeah, and you've said this too. When it comes down to it, is the West really willing to lose before starting World War III? And it's increasingly looking like when that moment comes, the answer is going to be no.
Well, that's what Matt Ho said when he was on our show. What Matthew Ho said, and it was a very interesting point. If I knew he would make that point, I would have probably devoted more time to that portion. But it's an interesting question because he said this was an error in judgment on Russia's part, and all signs point to the contrary. But there is that question. Well, what if the West just won't give them the win? What if we simply won't give them the win, whether they earned it or not? At that point, all bets are off.
Yeah. What if we will sooner blow up the stadium than lose the game?
Exactly. The way I put it is, usually when you play chess with someone, you play chess with a chess master. If they realize they've lost, they won't play out the end. They'll just tap their king and that's it. They'll start a new game. A lunatic will not tap the king. They'll pick up the board and throw the pieces in your face, and that could be us, right? That could be what they're dealing with. There's always that possibility.
Please clap.